Hello and welcome to The Broken Sword. Today we are taking a look at the reading order for Tolkien's writings.
Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
It is September 22nd, which means one thing. Happy Hobbit Day, everybody. This is a day that has been given to celebrate all things Tolkien to coincide with what would be the birthday of Bilbo and Frodo Baggins. So, to go in line with this upload, us and the majority of other Tolkien YouTubers have come together to create a playlist of a bunch of different videos that all celebrate Tolkien in one way or another. I will link the playlist in the annotations as well as putting it in the description below, so please go and check out all the others after finishing this one, as everyone has put in so much hard work to get these videos done. So with that little shout out done, let us carry on with today's subject, the reading order of Tolkien's works. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. What an introduction to an epic universe. People new to it all will often ask, what order should I read these books in? Which one do I really start with? What should I read after The Lord of the Rings? These are just some of the few questions that we get every single day. For people who are just jumping into the world of Tolkien, it can really be quite confusing and even a bit intimidating. Should you start with The Lord of the Rings first, or The Hobbit, or do you go straight for something different and dive into the Silmarillion? Well, to be honest, there is not necessarily a simple answer to this. I know it really can be a frustrating answer to start with, but there are factors that come into answering it, which is why I've given such a vague start. To consider, there are things like, how old are you, or how confident do you even feel about your reading age? So, I thought for you all today, what better way to celebrate Tolkien than to help new people discover his works or already Tolkien lovers make their next steps into his lore. So to help with this, I will take a look at a couple of different options for the reading orders that I have found, and then I will give my personal one with the reasons as to why I have chosen it later on. So first, let us consider the fairly safe and maybe perhaps obvious idea for the reading order, and that is to look at, quite simply, the order of the publishings of the main story texts. So, to break that down, we have first, The Hobbit, released in 1937, and then The Lord of the Rings, which consists of The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers and The Return of the King, published between 1954 and 1955. And then third is The Silmarillion, which came out in 1977, and then The Unfinished Tales, coming out in 1980. Next we have The Children of Húrin, which came out in 2007, and then Beren and Lúthien in 2017, and finally The Fall of Gondolin in 2018. Now this order gives you a safe covering, and once you have done those you can potentially go back to the collection of the History of Middle-earth series, which was published between 1983 and 1996, as this will give you a more detailed history of several parts of the world. But in this shorter list, I wouldn't say that they are essential readings. It is more if you are really interested in a deeper dive into the lore. And that is in fact a big thing about these lists that I kind of want you to consider. Are you looking to obtain as much knowledge as possible for all parts of the histories? Or are you just a bit more interested in the basic stories and the main heroes? Answering this will affect which ones I would choose for you. Moving on, the next version of a reading order we have here is one that I have actually taken from the Tolkien Society website. And this one is for more if you wish to read Tolkien's Middle-earth works approximately in the order that they were originally written. But they do say that this is a very rough guide, so this is what they say. Number 1, The Book of Lost Tales Volumes 1 and 2. Number 2, The Lays of Beleriand. Number 3, The Shaping of Middle-earth. Number 4, The Lost Road. Number 5, The Hobbit. Number 6, The Return of the Shadow. Number 7, The Treason of Isengard. Number 8, The War of the Ring. Number 9, Sauron Defeated, the first part. Number 10, The Peoples of Middle-earth, the first part. Number 11, The Lord of the Rings. Number 12, The Notion Club Papers, which is in Sauron Defeated. Number 13, Unfinished Tales, omitting Nani Hin Húrin. Number 14, The Children of Húrin. Number 15, Beren and Lúthien. 16, The Fall of Gondolin. 17, Morgoth's Ring. 18, The War of the Jewels. 19, The Silmarillion. 20, The Peoples of Middle-earth, the last part. And then 21, which is kind of a bonus one, The Nature of Middle-earth. Now, you may notice if you looked at the website yourself that I have added my own to this list, and that is the Nature of Middle-earth book that came out this year. So of course, this just gets added nicely to the bottom of the list. However, now that that one is completed, you may well be wondering as well, what about a chronological order to reading all the books? Maybe you want to go through all the events as they panned out in the years within Middle-earth. Well, this is a far less common way to do it, but if this is the case that you really want to do, then here is a rough chronological order for the main stories. Firstly, we have the Silmarillion. Now, the Silmarillion can be a hard and confusing read for someone who's not already familiar with the writings of Tolkien. However, in terms of time, it describes the beginnings, so it makes sense to come first. And I will also add here, if you are looking to get into the Silmarillion, don't expect a plain story like you may get in The Lord of the Rings. It is almost a bit more like a history textbook explaining the past events of the world. But anyway, next on our list we have the three great tales of the Elder Days, which are the Children of Húrin, Beren and Lúthien, and the Fall of Gondolin. Now these books give an extended version of these great tales of the Elder Days, which are all featured as a part of the Silmarillion. So, kinda makes sense to go here next. Then we have the Unfinished Tales. Sections of this book give details of the likes of Númenor, the Second Age and early Third Age, with elements that will play their role in The Lord of the Rings. So before we get onto our main adventure with the Hobbits, this is kind of the place to stop next. So now, once that is done, we go to a more familiar setting for most, and that is with The Hobbit. Although this book is not really linked to the Silmarillion that much, it is the next main story in the series, and it is the first one that was ever published, so it's definitely an important one. And then finally, we have the one and the only, The Lord of the Rings. After all, this is the story that is basically the conclusion of everything that happens in The Hobbit, as well as many things mentioned in the Silmarillion, such as the story of Sauron and the line of the Númenórean kings. So really, I would consider this one of the main pieces, and really this is where it all ends. So now that we've gone through those options, it's time for me to explain my personal preference. If it was me, I would go for a recommendation closer to the first order that I showed. I would start with The Hobbit for a few reasons. It is the easiest story to jump into in the Tolkien way of writing to make it easier to understand and, like I said, ease yourself into his legendarium. It also introduces you to many of his characters that you will stay close to, as well as the locations and the world that everything is set in, and all of this without ever overloading you too fast. It is also worth noting that The Hobbit was written to be a children's book after all, which hints how it is an easier story to get to grips with. So, look no further than Bilbo Baggins and the Quest of Erebor as your starting point. Next, it only makes sense to go straight into The Lord of the Rings. Many places and people that we have already met appear again in this story, but everything we know from before has been expanded on, and we learn that there is so much more going on in the world of Middle-earth. Technically here, there are actually 6 books, 2 within each of the published releases, but I'm going to count all of these simply as the full story of The Lord of the Rings. And as a bit of a bonus bit here, I would definitely recommend making sure you read the appendices at the end of the story, as you get to learn a lot of additional information that really helps build the world and answers some questions that many readers have in their heads. Now, after you've completed these main stories, the ones that most people are familiar with, where do you go next? Well, like I said before, I would go straight into the Silmarillion here. Now, many of you who are thinking of diving into this book may well be aware of its reputation as a difficult read, and although some of the language is difficult, it is rewarding once you reach the end. This covers a large amount of the backstory to the stories that you have already read, even if you weren't aware of it at the time. But even though the events happened before, due to the difficulty of the language, I would without a doubt say it is better to have worked your way up to this with The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings first. And another note to add to this here, many people seem confused to if there is really a story to the Silmarillion, which there is, but sometimes it takes until getting to the end to be able to just figure it all out of what all the different parts were adding up to. Like I kind of said before, it's almost a bit closer to a history textbook as one overarching story throughout the entire book. It is quite hard to explain until you read it and then you will understand. So really what I'm saying here is, do not be discouraged if it does not make complete sense to you to start with. It can take time before it really sinks in, perhaps if you read throughs in fact, but when it does start to click, the story is just purely epic. Now, if you have gotten through the Silmarillion and are eager for more, the next stop I would recommend is the Unfinished Tales. These stories and essays are a little more random as they cover many topics that were never actually completed by Tolkien during his life. However, a bit like the appendices, they cover topics that maybe you've just wondered about a bit, or a lot, like the subject of the other two of the five Astari, the Blue Wizards, or perhaps a question you did not even realise you were looking for an answer for, like the history of Galadriel and Celeborn. Again, like most of his stuff, it's just an interesting read. Now these next few I will bring together into one, and these are the 3 stories that are included within the Silmarillion, but through added notes made into their own releases at later dates. And I would recommend the order for these being the Children of Húrin, Beren and Lúthien, and then the Fall of Gondolin. So basically the order that they were released in. These basically take each of the great tales and add a greater depth to each one. And to be fair, if you're this far through, you are most likely looking for greater depth. Now lastly, we reach the 12-volume series of the history of Middle-earth to finish things off. The full list of this collection is as follows, including an unofficial 13th entry. So at number 1 we have the Book of Lost Tales Part 1, number 2 the Book of Lost Tales Part 2, number 3 the Lays of Beleriand, number 4 the Shaping of Middle-earth, number 5 the Lost Road and Other Writings, number 6 the Return of the Shadow, the History of the Lord of the Rings Volume 1, number 7 the Treason of Isengard, the History of the Lord of the Rings Volume 2, number 8 the War of the Ring, the History of the Lord of the Rings Volume 3, number 9 Sauron Defeated, includes the History of the Lord of the Rings Volume 4, number 10 Morgoth's Ring, the later Silmarillion Volume 1, number 11 The War of the Jewels, the later Silmarillion Volume 2, number 12 The Peoples of Middle-earth, and number 13 The Nature of Middle-earth. So firstly, the official History of Middle-earth collection is said to have 12 volumes as stated above. Then technically, Volume 13 is the History of Middle-earth Index that was published in 2002, but really it is just an index for the previous 12 volumes, and even before this was taken into account, a lot of people thought of the Unfinished Tales as an unofficial 13th volume, and now take the just released The Nature of Middle-earth as the unofficial 14th volume to the series. But for me, I haven't included the Unfinished Tales here, and I've put The Nature of Middle-earth as that unofficial 13, but I hope you get the idea. Anyway, this collection shows how Tolkien developed the conception of Middle-earth as a fictional place with its own history, its own peoples, its own languages, and how he came to develop the stories that made up the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings. Some people are not quite aware, but it makes sense to emphasise. These books are not a history of Middle-earth in the sense of being a chronicle of events in Middle-earth written from an in-universe perspective. It is instead an out-of-universe history of Tolkien's creative process, which, if you are a fan of Tolkien and a lover of his writings, it is just fascinating to dive into. And now finally, as a bonus entry once you have completed your journeys through Middle-earth, another entry I would recommend that is worth considering is the 1981 book of The Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. These letters include a mixture of things like personal letters to Tolkien's wife Edith, his son Christopher Tolkien, and his other children, letters about Tolkien's career as a professor, letters to his publishers at Allen and Unwin explaining his failings to meet the deadline and related topics, and the letters about Middle-earth. So of course this last point is the one that is most likely to spark some interest. I personally find a lot of information for videos that I make from these letters. This one is definitely less essential as such, but again, definitely worth a mention to anyone with an extra keen interest. Sometimes it is just amazing to look back at just how much he had written and how much is actually available to us. It is just incredible. So there we have it, that is my recommended reading list when looking at the world of J.R.R. Tolkien. As much as I say these are my recommendations, you have to remember everyone is different, so some of these may not work for you. Do you have a younger child? Obviously The Hobbit is the best and safest place to start. Are you older and already aware in passing of some of his works? Then perhaps jumping straight into The Lord of the Rings is better for you. Are you a massive fan of poetry? Then maybe entries like The Adventures of Tom Bombadil are more for you and you'd love to read them much earlier. Perhaps you've only seen the movies and you just want to dive in deeper. Then again here I would probably say starting with The Lord of the Rings is the place to go. But at the end of the day, there is no right or wrong order to read them in. Tolkien's Legendarium is one where you can enjoy it in any order. You can jump in and out at different points and still get the full experience. It all comes down to the reader themselves. So as long as you are enjoying it, no one can say you are wrong. And also, to just add a little tip here that I used to find incredibly useful, and to be honest I still do today, if you are struggling to understand anything at all, like perhaps something in the Silmarillion, a great idea is to listen to an audiobook while reading along to really help you come to grips with it. Like I said, I still like to do it even now. In fact, even with Andy Serkis's new release of The Lord of the Rings, once again I am going through that story listening to him put on an awesome performance. And now that that is rounded up, it is time for my question for you all today, and that is, would you make any changes to my recommended reading order? Would you include the poems? Would you change the order of the 3 great tales? Or perhaps even have them before the Silmarillion? Maybe it's something that is better to read in greater detail and then skip out of the Silmarillion book. Or maybe there's something else entirely. I'd love to hear all your thoughts and opinions on this in the comment section below. And also here, just to give another quick shout out for the Hobbit Day playlist put together by all the wonderful Tolkien YouTubers. Do not forget to check it out, as there is a great variety of topics in there and everyone has put in some hard work. And now that we have reached the end of the video, I would also like to remind you all, we do not just have this channel, but 3 others as well, and they are the Tabletop Alliance for all things tabletop gaming, the 6th Ranger for all things Power Rangers, and History of Dragon Ball for all things Dragon Ball. Links to all of those channels will be in the description below if any of them may interest you. And now to shout out our patrons. Firstly, our Divine Power team members of Kevin, Abram, Matt and Glorfindel of Gondolin. You are all awesome. And a big thanks to our Fire Demon tier members of Nashith, Denver Steel and Gregory. And as well, I cannot forget the Wizard Staff tier members of John, Andrew and Pirate747. Every single one of you is a true legend of the Brohirrim. And finally, if you have not already as well, please do all that great stuff. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. All of these things massively help us out. And like I said in our previous video, our view percentage from channels who are not subscribed is huge. So help us switch that the other way to help us grow as a channel. And so, thank you if you have managed to reach the very end of this video with me today. For one last time, happy Hobbit Day, and I will see you next time on The Broken Sword.